Your kids are soft. You lack discipline.
We landed on the moon!
You didn't earn the knowledge for yourselves, so you don't take any responsibility.
It's like we've forgotten who we are. Explorers, pioneers.
It's the only thing you can be sure of. Hey, man, I went to Palmer West in San Jose, which is ceasing to exist, so you can't shit on your previous school too much.
It's true. Yeah. We have an alma mater. You just have a, yeah.
I just have an empty building in Silicon Valley. Yeah.
Well, we're already recording, so we just kind of jump in here and make it's pretty casual. The main reason I wanted to have you on, because we haven't had out of office guests in a while, was basically, we can talk a little bit about somatic senses just as it is now. But the goal of today's podcast with you is to kind of explore the ecosystem of the continuing education, platform as it exists for PTs, chiros, ATCs, whatever you want to say our profession, consists of, kind of the ups and downs, what you think could be better, what the, your goals from a company standpoint are. But before we kind of tackle all that, obviously you're a chiro that went to a school that doesn't exist anymore, but you were in clinical practice for how many years? Like, give us a little bit of the background of from Palmer West into practice and now into, full-time continuing education company.
Yeah. So I was in practice for a decade, almost to the day, actually. I'm going to say a little bit unique in the reasons I went to chiro school. I got done a kinesiology degree at the University of New Brunswick and kind of went, well, shit, I can't do anything with the kinesiology degree. Look at that. I should probably keep going to school, and really just kind of looked at all the options. I feel like I'm one of those people, I could probably be happy doing almost anything, but I'd have to be very interested in what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And so for the most part, I didn't have this big emotional chiropractor saved me story that a lot of chiropractors do. I had what do I want to learn? What would keep me interested for a few more years, and what's going to lead to something meaningful for me in the future, like a career or something of that sort. And so, without giving you all the details of what that search looked like, I settled on chiro almost entirely based on the curriculum of what it looked like we were going to be learning compared to physio, osteo, medical school, all those things. And so once I decided that, it was just a matter of picking which school, and I toured around to a few schools, and I remember going into Palmer West and going, there, that's the one. This is where I want to go. And I'm from New Brunswick, Canada, and so northeast of Maine. So literally could almost not go further unless I was going a little bit south to LA. Yeah. But I went to that school and I loved it, man. I absolutely loved school. Just like every chiro student, I had my frustrations with what school was like. But I know enough people in other professions to find out that's normal. Everyone's like that. Everyone kind of has a little chip on their shoulder about their profession when they graduate in a little way. And so I graduated from school there, and short version being I found the place I currently live, Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada, on a snowboard trip. And so I found it completely by accident, didn't even know it existed before that trip, and kind of held it in high regard for a few years while I was in school, kept revisiting. And then when the time came, I had a couple of my mentors say, well, if you know where you want to live eventually, don't mess around. Don't go somewhere else. Just move there. Go now, set up a life, get it going, because you might get stuck somewhere else. Because I know people who have done that they had to uproot their entire life afterwards. So I moved here to Kelowna, BC. Absolutely loved it. I opened my own practice almost immediately. The full complete opening, there was a soft opening within 2 months of me getting here. The full complete opening was within 4 months of me getting here. I was fully booked within 2 months after opening. It was nuts. And I was very fortunate to be kind of on the front end of this wave that we are currently experiencing, maybe almost a dulling of, which is kind of like the R2P mentality and the functional rehab mentality. I came from a background where I was a personal trainer for over 10 years by the time I got to chiro. I came from a long background of a whole bunch of different sports and a whole bunch of different strength and conditioning and personal training and a kinesiology degree. And so when I got to my hometown, everyone here was, not everyone, but there was mostly the culture of chiro here was still very old school. It was still very spine only focused. There's nothing wrong with, but there's really no one that had kind of lived in that world. And so I showed up as a guy that had been competing in Olympic lifting, and I was kettlebell certified and was a personal trainer, and CrossFit became this huge thing for me, not because I did it as a business plan, but just because those were my people, Olympic lifters, bodybuilders, power lifters, CrossFitters, kettlebell guys, all that kind of stuff. So I really, really benefited from just lucky timing of going exactly where I wanted to live. And then I got there, I set up a space that I had a climbing wall in my office. I had, like a squat rack and the kettlebells and all this shit. But this was 2011. This was right before that became kind of a common thing to do. And so it went very well for me business wise. I was fully booked. I had wait lists months long at some points. But the reality was I had chosen this profession not because I had a gigantic passion for the specifics of chiropractic. I did have a huge passion for working with humans and human movement and the human body. To be entirely honest, my practice probably would have looked almost identical if I was a physio, osteo, kinesiologist, chiro, those sorts of things. And people got a sense of that. So it went really well, but I found, honestly, the interpersonal part of all of it to be really, really fatiguing for me. I'm a lone wolf through and through. I'm an introvert. I'm not shy. I mean, I've spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours on stage teaching now, but I found myself, even by lunchtime almost every day, 2 months into practice, feeling kind of emotional and feeling drained and feeling like I had given too much of myself. And there was this big personality thing that I hadn't learned of how to be a good chiro without giving every inch of myself. And so, short version of this long story, I got involved in education very shortly thereafter that. I was the first educator for rock tape in Canada when rock tape was kind of on its big explosive path. So I got to travel and teach a lot for rock tape really early on. And then got involved with a good friend of mine, Michael Maxwell, because he was hosting a million different courses out here. And fast forward through all of that, and I joined Somatic Senses. It became more of a passion than actually being in clinical practice than mine. I was traveling a lot, teaching a lot, hosting courses a lot, and slowly figured out that I could essentially make a living doing it. And I'm not going to say I was better at it, because I'd like to think I was pretty good in clinical practice, but it suited my personality more. It suited a big part of who I was. I'm a nerd. I'm a dork. I'm an introvert. And one of the things you probably figure out is a lot of the high-end educators out there kind of have personalities that make them not the prototypical friendly clinician. There's a lot of them actually are a little unique in that way. There's a certain kind of mind that goes well into education. And that was me. And so I've probably personally taught, I'm going to say, somewhere between 100 and 200 courses on a variety of topics over the years. It's been a lot. And then with Somatic Senses now, the education business that I run here now, we've probably hosted, I'm going to say, about 500 to 700 seminars or something of that sort. It's been a lot. And so that's the full-time gig now. As of 2 years ago, about 2 years ago, I stopped clinical practice. One of the main reasons being Somatic Senses hit the point where I went, I can make a big impact in this industry with this now. And it's just not going to work as a side hustle. If I want to make something big of this, if I want to make a real big impact in this world, it can't do it half-assed. I can't do it half-time. And so made the switch, and it was the best decision I've made in a long time.
Well, damn it. There's a bunch of things I'd like to dive into, because I know, like, students and other docs listening to this, like, deciding on a career choice and then realizing it's not a good personality fit, not a like skill or finance-based decision is, I would say, not unique in people facing that challenge, but actually like taking the leap. But if we stay on track and just go high level, like you said, you realized you could have a big impact with this. I'm sure that there was obviously financial security behind it that matched clinical practice, or maybe is better or on par. I don't know, all that had to be there, just from a logic standpoint, I would assume. But what's the impact? I mean, obviously you were educating for a company that was already out there doing it across, the world. There's a bunch of other companies that do this. There's a bunch of people that do it. Why jump into this? Like, what was the gap that need filled? What do you think you could do with it?
Two big things. So one, regardless of the content, regardless of who's teaching, regardless of the quality of the whole thing, the ability to get in a room with fellow clinicians and people that you don't know for a weekend that's not completely academic, actually has something to do with your job, is suspiciously motivating. I mean, you probably remember a few of the first seminars you ever took that you show back up at work on Monday and you're like, oh, like you're just on fire. And so even if you had kind of a meh seminar, just literally being surrounded by people that are there to better themselves, there's just this huge unspoken thing that's a massive benefit to actually just getting the education in rooms with other people and talking it out. Because even for those of us that worked in big clinics that had lots of staff and have lots of colleagues, the excuse to kind of get together and work on your skills and discuss cases and those kind of things, they're few and far between. And they feel paced in a way that's really difficult to find meaning in when it's in your day-to-day practice. Taking time out and putting yourself in a room for 2 days with people you're not familiar with, but you have something in common with, hugely valuable. So that's regardless of the actual educational content itself. But with somatic senses, we've got, I'm going to say it's between 9 and 11,000 chiropractors in Canada. And we hit a point where I had an aha moment about 3 or 4 years ago where I went like, oh man, we've educated probably about half of the chiros in this entire country at some point have heard of me or my face or my name or my company in some way. Same with Michael Maxwell. And I kind of had this moment of like, oh wow, we actually have the ability to help steer the giant ship that is this profession in this country. And so still like right now across all platforms, we've probably got, I don't know how many of them are Canadian because I'm not keeping track of it anymore, but we've probably got about 7,000 or 8,000 chiros that kind of look to us in some way for education, inspiration, whatever it might be. So it's probably, in all likelihood, more than half, the majority of the chiropractors in this country, I have the ability to influence them. And so that is intimidating. And it's a responsibility, but it's also extremely motivating to know that when I send out a newsletter, because the newsletter is probably about 5,000 people, that I'm going to get at like 25% of my profession at some point is going to have the thoughts in their mind that I put there. It's strange to actually feel like that. But it gives you the impetus to kind of go, okay, what should we be doing? What philosophy can I help instill? What ideas, what level of clinical excellence, what clinical ideas, what kind of culture can I instill in all of this? Because all of these things are what make up a profession. There's a culture to it, there's an education, there's regulation, there's all these different things. And so, you know, I don't think about it massively, but I do know that I have the ability to kind of go, hey, everybody, this is kind of an important thing. Just trust me, you need to take this course, or you should listen to this person, or you should think about this, or this is why it matters. To give a small example of that, I sent a newsletter last year, essentially just titled Why Pediatrics Matter, because we were going to start teaching evidence-based pediatrics. And the response I got from that email was immense. And it got forwarded through so many different places that I didn't know it was getting forwarded to, because I essentially felt like our profession was under attack specifically in the realm of pediatrics, but that we kind of deserved it because it's a weak spot. It was a weak spot for our profession. It was where a lot of the kooks and a lot of the old school people congregated. And yet it was the place that our profession had the highest ability to make an impact. And so with me, I kind of, it sounds corny, but like I was feeling the weight of that a little bit. And so knowing that I was going to try to be part of that solution, I went, here we go. I'm just straight up going to send a newsletter, like a little mini novella about this, because I need people to know where I stand on it, because this is an important topic in our profession at this time. And at the time, especially in British Columbia, we had just recently had a bunch of national news coverage in a negative light about chiropractors and pediatrics. So I wasn't doing it publicly, but I had to kind of remind people like, hey, this is important, and this is what I think reasonable people should be doing about it. And so having that ability now it's good, but I can't do that part-time. You know, I can't kind of half-assed figure these things out. These are the things that actually matter to me, and I like being able to have a say in our profession that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe a little aside, how do you, if you're not in clinical practice anymore, obviously you're in the clinical education game, but how do you stay abreast to what you should be expecting people to listen to you about? So if you're going to send out a newsletter
Yep.
saying, hey, I think these are great classes, how do you make sure that that is the case? Like, what's that process look like for you now?
Yeah, it changes. It depends. I'm gonna Stu McGill this shit. It depends. It always depends. It depends on the educator, depends on the topic, depends on the time, depends on the place. There are some things that are so obvious and glaring, like our profession's problem with pediatrics, that it was you practically don't even have to be in the profession or have ever been in it to kind of go, hey guys, this is kind of this big issue that I think there's a reasonable way to think about and address in our profession. When it comes to a lot of the other kind of judging the value of things, some of it is going to the courses myself. Some of it is talking to a lot of my colleagues. I don't have any normal friends. All I have is friends in freaking healthcare, right? Or strength and conditioning or whatever it would be in that space. And then, yeah, it's a mix of different things. So like if someone's literally written a textbook on it and I know 10 people who have read that textbook and they all think this guy is the expert, I don't need to sit through his course. I probably don't even need to talk to him. I just need to know if he's really good at educating because I want to learn from him. And I think other people should too. And that's literally like the example of what Stuart McGill was 20 years ago. That's how I came across Michael Shacklock, and again, with Michael Shacklock, like he's been teaching for us for 8 years now, which again, I kind of lucked out that I was on the early wave before neurodynamics became a big thing in North America. But it was literally, I don't remember specifically who it was, but I think it was Charlie Weingroff. It was someone in that world was just like Michael Shacklock. I went to dinner with one of them after a course and I said, who's really, really excellent that nobody knows? And without flinching, I believe it was Charlie, said, it's Michael Shacklock. You need to take his course. And kind of made me feel like a fool for having never taken his course.
Sounds like a Charlie move.
It does sound like a Charlie move. I've got a lot of those stories with Charlie and me. But anyway, it was true. It was just outright true. And I go, holy shit, this guy literally wrote the book. He wrote the book. He created this entire part of the industry. And then you kind of look at it and go, how have I never heard of this guy? And then we bring him in to teach, and he literally set the bar for me, for educators, the first time. I remember going, oh, that's what a pro looks like. And that was after I had just been through like 80 seminars in the last 3 years that I had been to. And I remember going like, oh, there's levels to this shit. And he just let me know what the upper level is, right? And so there's kind of a web of ways that you find these things out and find out what you hear is valuable. Some of it is being at courses, talking to people. Some of it's talking to the educators because I want to find out who the smart people learn from. And then some of it is just gut instinct in a way. You talk to someone, you go, this person's got something. The way that their brain works, this needs to be a mental process more people have access to. And so I don't have a straight answer other than there's a large net and a large web of ways that I kind of come across stuff. And sometimes it hasn't worked. I have hosted courses where I've instantly gone, not doing this one again.
Well, let's use Shacklock to dive deeper into that. So what makes him, obviously, if you've taken his course, you probably know some of these things, but for people that haven't, or even people that have, from your perspective, what makes him the upper echelon of educator? Obviously knowledge base, all those bare bones things, but like, what are a few, like 2 or 3 things that you're just like, this guy absolutely kills this, that sets him apart?
Oh God, there's so many things. One of them being the absolute logic of every word that comes out of the guy's mouth, meaning he's not ever claiming something that he doesn't have some extensive reasoning or research or method behind. Like that's probably the number one. He's a good educator in the way that he's a very, very good public speaker. He's got he's not yelling at you, but he's not whispering. He's, not trying to force anything down your throat. So the tone and the culture he brings, regardless of the content, is absolutely amazing. He's a very approachable educator that way. But once you go through his material, which is now 30 hours in the first course alone, you look at it and you go, this is how I wish my brain worked on every topic I was seeking to understand. because of what he does for neurodynamics. And he does it with a very specific topic that he's a world-class expert in. But you look at it and McGill did the same thing, regardless of whether or not you kind of subscribe to his thought process now. McGill very much did the same thing at a time where he took low back pain and structured it in such an immense way for both pain and performance that you kind of look at it and you go, this makes so much sense. I think McGill probably erred a little bit more on the side of drinking his own Kool-Aid a little more. But he was also an immensely good educator and still is a very good educator. And I would gladly go take his course again. But Shacklock had a structured and logical way of approaching almost everything that you were almost embarrassed you didn't think that way after you were done. And to me, that's a sign of a good educator. Everything they say is understandable. Everything is logical. Everything fits within a greater scheme. Everything has reasoning behind it. And then you get done and you go, every single one of these facts is perfectly logical in isolation and is not surprising to me. But then I put this greater big thing together and I'm almost embarrassed that I didn't see this giant picture and know all the details before.
Yeah.
That was my experience. I took it 4 times in a row. This is neurodynamics level 1. Because I remember going like, I need mastery of this. And that's actually a pretty common occurrence up here, is that people take his course 2 or 3 times because they look at it and go, it is so good and I want to master it.
When, logic is great, but a lot of clinicians go, well, yeah, it's very hard to logic your way through an active, patient. But the thing that walks hand in hand with logic with Shacklock himself, but then also what he instills in somebody at his course would be certainty. And the certainty is not then based upon his opinion. It, like you said, it has been, we kind of talk about like Shacklock's like a walking 26,000, article review. Like he's just like a Rolodex and he says something, he's like, oh yeah, let me pull it out. That's what we're all seeking for, is that certainty, which then, confidence is there and all the things that you want and the kind of, whatever you want to call it, soft skills of practice outside of the actual, like, hands-on skills. That's what he's so good at, because it does come from that place of like, no, it's been verified, it's valid. I think he's a great example of that. And we could probably, bring up 10 other examples that all vary a little bit, and certain personalities jive better with certain people for sure. If we're talking about recommending certain courses, we got Seth here. So Seth graduated for 17th. 16th, huh? One more day. Sorry. I'll give you that day.
Wow.
It was my birthday, so I had.
Yeah, there you go. For somebody like Seth that took a fair number of courses in school, which is not uncommon, but now is out in the wild and has to basically weigh the cost of, full doctor price on a course, travel, full-time practice, whatever else is going on in your life. As much as we hate to say like, hey, tell us what courses you would take, like, is there a curriculum you would put in place that you're like, you have to take these few things to be just like Shacklock's at the top of the educational game, to be top level, clinician? Like if you don't have these, good luck. Not going to happen.
I've kind of got, I guess, 2 different processes that I think about that with. So for one, it really depends on the person. So I came from a background of literally watching people move all day, every day, and through coaching people all day, every day. And so I had a guy in my class in school who came from real estate. And then he decided he really wanted to be a chiro. He went and did all the prerequisites. He struggled through them, but he got there. And so what he needed upon graduation, worlds different from what I needed upon graduation. With that being said, I think both people can become equally excellent at their job. Just one's going to be kind of slightly newer to the world of being a clinician, whereas not as if a trainer is a clinician, but a lot of the soft skills and a lot of the rehab part came with me. So first, it's just going to depend on the person, and building in self-awareness is such an important part of that. And so one of the things I actually think is really advisable when you're a student and the first couple of years after being a student is going to a lot of the big conferences where you get to see a dozen different people speak. You will take absolutely nothing clinically applicable from them the vast majority of the time. You will get a huge amount of motivation, but more than anything, you're essentially going to be able to look at the menu or a bunch of different menus of what is available out there for thought processes, for approaches, for tools, for philosophies, all these different things. And I think that's highly valuable, because it's really easy to accidentally become an ART practitioner. It's really easy to become a kettlebell guy. It's really easy to become any of these things by going and being your first seminar. So I think it's actually, when you're first graduating, it's actually really important to go see a little bit of everything. And big conferences are usually cheap to attend. There's massive amounts of other people there. It's hugely motivating. Go to the Functional Training Summit in Long Beach, which I did when I was in school, which is by Perform Better. Go to Parker, go to wherever it is, wherever you are in the world, go to that kind of stuff, because you'll see the options. And I'd recommend going to the big ones, like the ones that the big names go to, because you'll see that. So that's one part. Next kind of phase in my mind is, it's an approach that I really don't like for mature practitioners, but for people in their first 5 years, it's just literally building a tool belt. And by that, I mean, it almost hurts me to say it because I hate the idea of doing it once you're good at it, but it's like, you need a soft tissue technique. You need either like an ART or an FR or some form of something that, as long as you have a framework to put it in, it's useful to you. You need some structured way to look at human movement, an FMS or an SFMA. You need some kind of understanding of loading strategy. For me, that was a huge part of my practice, was manual therapy and loading. Straight across the board. And then education was a huge part of that, just because I naturally felt the need to do that. There's kind of, I'm not going to say techniques, but tools. And you're going to get a sense at some point that someone needs a tool that you don't really have. And that's a really humbling experience. And so some of the big ones are look at how to coach people well, load people well, need a soft tissue technique, preferably multiple, and then whatever else might be. And then there are some that are so specific that I feel like you're actually a shittier practitioner if you don't have them. One of them being neurodynamics. It really is one of the only courses I can ever say I walked into not knowing what I didn't know. I thought I was there giving myself a pat on the back of like, I'm going to be better at my job. And I left feeling better at my job, but looking back 4 days earlier, because it was a 4-day course originally, going, oh, I was really shitty at this before. I just didn't know I was shitty at it before. But neurodynamics to me it's that important that people get good at that. Even if they take the course once and just have the manual to refer to, I think it's that important. And then there are others that I think are debatable, that they're potentially very important because they are fundamental, DNS being one of them. But I think you can take a lot of the DNS principles and apply them in a lot of different places. But DNS is like, you can't just take a course and kind of be a DNS practitioner. Like you got to do a lot. It was probably, I'm going to say course number 4 before I kind of went, okay, like I think I get it with DNS. Probably course number 8 or 9 before I was like, I get it. I'm good. Like, not that I don't need to take any more because I still needed to master it, but I went, I can now take DNS and look through it as a lens on every person that I see. And I think that was highly valuable. And then there's others that I think, I could go on. We've done, 500 to 1,000 seminars, right? Like there's a lot of them. Probably one I would throw in specifically, this is going to be controversial for a lot of people, is go learn from Greg Lehman. He has a course called Reconciling Biomechanics with Pain Science. If you want to actually learn how to reconcile biomechanics and pain science, he accomplishes it. And I think pain science is one of those things that but a lot of us feel like we've kind of done a little bit of, and we understand a little bit of, because people will mention it in all their courses, almost like a box they have to check. But then Greg does an intentional and very good job of taking the two realms and reconciling them. He's not a pure pain science guy that's drinking the Kool-Aid and trying to tell everyone they're wrong like a lot of guys are. He's also not a guy that likes to completely deny that loading matters. And so he spends a lot of that weekend talking about loading through a pain perspective, which is amazing. With that being said, it's the only course I've ever had that I've had people walk out on. So,
well, again, it's a personality mismatch with a lot of that stuff. So
yeah, and he has calmed down about it. But yeah, I think you start with tools early on in your career, maybe the first 5 years, and then as you hit maybe 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, whatever it is, learning from the master integrators is very important. The people like Charlie, I put Charlie Weingroff in that. I actually put Greg Lehman in that as well. The people who can take from all these different realms, all these different techniques, and boil it down into very useful, very niche information.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like this is, and a lot of these aren't necessarily the people that I go and learn from. Some of them are, some of them aren't. Charlie's on that list, right? Master Integrator. Craig Liebenson's on that list. All he does is integrate stuff. Greg Lehman's on that list. All he does is take other people's stuff and turn it into something usable and digestible in the lane that they're trying to deliver it in. And so I think at a certain point, you need to learn from the master integrators once you feel like you've checked a lot of the boxes, as far as having all the techniques. Then you move on to learning from the integrators, and then you kind of niche down on topic after that.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, like it's like I'm going to learn. So at one point I did this. I spent 18 months. Every course I took was about shoulders, because I was just like, well, I'm going to be a shoulder guy now. And so, you know, I took Eric Cressy's course. I took Mike Reynolds' course. I took, you know, Michael Maxwell's course from Somatic Senses, which is just worlds and levels above everyone else's. I read the textbooks on it. I read the research on it. I was like, I'm going to be a shoulder guy, because this feels like I'm getting a lot of people in the clinic and I'm not fully mastering this, but I now have all the tools I need that no matter what they tell me to do, I'm going to be able to do it. I just need to understand the master's approach to a shoulder. And then, you know, apply that to a TMJ, apply that to gait, apply that to knee pain, apply it to ACLs, apply it to whatever you want. And I feel like you've essentially just got a full career worth of learning to do now.
Yeah. Welcome to the show.
Yeah.
So what's your take on this? We echo this in the clinic. And then, you know, when working with students that we kind of help mentor, when I'm teaching, I always say we talk about first principles, Craig Levinson, you know, first principles, all this stuff. First principles for anyone in the medical profession is science. Like that's first principles, right? It is not methodological. It's not technique. That's science. In my opinion, all those people that you mentioned that are master integrators, that's, I would say, a huge reason why, right? Is that they are able to dissect what somebody taught them, which is a method or a technique. Neurodynamics is a method, even though it's, you know, hard cooked into the science that basically he did himself. But you can dissect that stuff and say, well, I understand why this works, and I may not do it exactly like this, but I'm not also bastardizing it so much that it's moving away from what the original concept was. So when let's say you're getting further, you're not a Seth anymore, and you're getting into that, looking at these master integrators and things, do you think it's important for people to go back and like make sure that they haven't removed themselves so far away that if like I was, you know, a new drug came out or a new method comes out and you had to explain, you know, the physiologic process behind that, you're like, Jesus, I don't know if I could. I see that as a huge problem myself. So is there anything that you currently do with somatic senses or will do in the future to kind of lean into that? Because again, I know you're not a traditional university, but like it's not also that we have like Shacklock out there teaching like neurophysiology, right? That's not what the course is. So like, how would you work on that if you were a clinician, you know, a decade into practice?
So funny enough, I taught 2 years ago now at the BC Chiropractors Convention here in British Columbia. And the title of my talk was How to Science, because it's so fundamentally important to everything else, because you use science to learn what you need to learn to be able to understand the applications. But one of the problems is that we are now in a transition period where probably 80% of people in practice were in practice before social media. They were in practice before easy online research access. They were in practice before all these things. They don't have the tools or the understanding to be able to check the basic science. They know how to listen to another person for a weekend talk about the applied science. And so I literally taught a course on how to quickly access, find, and interpret the highest quality evidence. Really freaking hard thing to teach in an hour, I'll tell you that. But that was the goal. And so I 100% agree. The hard part is that this is an industry. Education is an industry. Meaning, if I said, let's get together for a weekend and review neurophysiology, no one signs up.
Right.
And it is as a business model, it fails, which is a problem. And so to me, my solution, which is coming in a larger scale, is a step further back, where I don't go, here's a topical review of the fundamentals. It's here's how you go find those fundamentals quickly and easy so you can refresh them yourself. Because I know you're not going to, pay $500 plus hotels plus airfare to come hang out with me for a weekend while I review boring stuff or while I review just a whole bunch of research for you. You want something you can use on Monday. And as much as that's disgruntling to me, because I live in the world of reading research, I know the industry enough to know I need to give people what's actually going to enable the thing I want. I don't need to give them the thing that they want. I don't want to give them the thing that I want them to want. I need to give them what they want, which will enable it to happen. And so there are a very select few educators who are very, very good at taking that basic fundamental cellular level research and tying it into everything they do. They exist. Michael Maxwell is one of those. Michael Shacklock's actually pretty good at that. But even stuff to reach his level, there you probably need fundamental learning before that. I don't even know if I remember the question at this point. I'm more saying I agree that there are being able to access basic sciences and research and understand it and use it and apply it to what we do on a day-to-day basis is a fundamental skill that I do agree is actually missing. And I've literally started building courses on how to fix that problem.
Yeah. Well, awesome. That was the question of, how would you fill in that in a somatic senses, business model?
Yeah.
So I'm glad to hear there is something there. And like you said, I think anybody that's really good at educating too, it is cooked in. Like if you had the time to drill down on something from a question standpoint with somebody like Shacklock or, Maxwell, any of these people, they could do it. And it's not that you'd be trying to hold the feet to the fire or test them, but like, that is the certainty piece again. They broke it down. That's why it makes sense. But I just see that as a major flaw in the first few years of practice. It's like you almost like shut that down, get force fed, as you said, which is kind of interesting when you were saying, the tone of a speaker like Shacklock, the tone and, the way that they approach the crowd. I was listening to Taylor Sheridan on Rogan talk about like he hates movies that like preach to you versus like he's trying to write to have more questions at the end, which I just thought it was like really funny. He hates Forrest Gump for that reason. But that's what you want from a course. You think it is applied. You do want to leave Sunday on the plane back. You're like, Jesus, I know exactly what I'm going to try Monday. But just like when you left a 4-day Shacklock class the first time, you're like, shit, there's a lot of stuff I gotta get after. So it uncovers more gaps. And I think that's why we love it, because we're all kind of nerds if we're doing that. And if you knew all the answers, that road's done, and that's not fun anymore, Yeah.
To be fair though, like in defense of all of it, because I've surrounded myself with so many practitioners of every kind, because I've literally just been in rooms with them over and over again. There are so many personality types. There are so many, there's probably an ideal of who's going to be really successful as far as a practitioner goes. But I know some extremely quiet, shy, introverted, unsure, non-confident people that are great practitioners. And I know people on the exact opposite end of that spectrum in every other way. And I'm only saying that to say, I think each of them has a teacher that is good for them. I think each of them has someone. There are people who just need to be convinced of what the importance of whatever they're listening to. And then there are people who need to be more skeptical, that they believe everything. And I think that there's all these personality traits sitting in any audience. Let's say the average audience at a seminar is 20 people, it's probably just a bell curve. Most of those people are probably somewhere in the middle, but there are a lot of personalities that need different tones. They need a different teacher, regardless of the content. Sometimes you just have to be like, just shut up and believe me, this is why it works. And then other times you need to actually kind of, coddle people. You need to kind of take them along, swaddle them, and put them exactly where they need to be. And that's all fine. I'm only saying that to say, I know who I get along with. I know who I teach well. I know who I learn well from. And I know who probably the average does. But I know a lot of people who come from different backgrounds, different cultures, or have different personalities. They need a whole variety of things. And sometimes just being a big, boisterous, loud personality is great. And then other times being very small and very personable is also great. It really depends on the audience and the personalities.
That's why I thought it was crazy. Somebody we all know, obviously I won't mention names, that's big in the education realm. I was talking to somebody from Australia, and I was like, man, you should have them out. And they're like, they're too certain. It's too, and I was like, what? They're like, no, it's like, they know like this is the thing and this is the way it is. And that doesn't go over well in Australia. And I was like, oh,
Perfect.
all right,
Yeah.
cool.
You know,
like,
it's actually, it's the same here in Canada. It's the same.
Yeah.
People,
Which I kind of like.
If you give people the answer, they go, oh.
You have to play Jeopardy with them and answering a question. Yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah.
So you mentioned way earlier in the conversation that when students, new docs exit school, for whatever reason, you kind of have a chip on your shoulder, which sends you into the profession with this kind of like, maybe not like I'm going to do it my way, but like I kind of know what's best from a silo, which this is getting outside of maybe education, but like something that shuts people off to being open-minded about new ideas is that they think they're right. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's a big conundrum now, because our profession is, sometimes it seems like however many there are 66,000 individuals instead of 66,000 chiros, which maybe that's not a great thing either. But is there I don't know exactly how to frame the question, but how do you beat that back? Or like, why does that chip exist in the first place? Is it just our profession's been under attack from medical, asylum forever? Is it the fact that I don't know why does that exist? What's your opinion?
In my opinion, if you're surrounded by the exact same people all day, every day for 4 years straight, you're going to lose respect for most of them. That's just the reality of it.
Yeah.
Because they're not close enough to you to be your family, and you don't get to see all the good. You don't get to see their childhood. You don't get to see their vulnerabilities. All you see is them trying to be good at something and sucking at it for 4 years, because that's all of us, And so the vast majority of therapists graduate thinking we're all idiots. At least most of us are actually idiots. Half of my teachers are idiots. Half of the students are idiots. And they're not. They're just humans, right? And so a lot of the time we see that, and we also get stuck in this echo chamber of everyone voicing what they think about the profession and bitching about it. And the way humans are wired is that takes up a lot of mental space. It takes up a lot of your persona. It takes a huge amount of effort to be surrounded by people for 4 years and still love them all to death and be confident they're going to be great doctors. It also feels the exact same when you hear people constantly bitch about their profession. And I'm fortunate in that I have, like, my sister's a medical doctor who is going through medical school. She only started medical school 18 months before I started chiro school. And we got to compare notes a lot of the time. And it was even worse in medicine. Medical doctors all are now graduating thinking most medical doctors are idiots, which is hilarious to me.
Right.
And maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But a lot of it is just, you're stuck. It doesn't matter what you're studying. You're stuck in this tiny little world for a while, to the point that it becomes representative of what the real world is, only for you to leave and realize all that matters is the patient. I need to get much, much better at treating, helping people, period. Doesn't matter if I graduated with a bunch of idiots. That has no impact on me at this moment in this room with this patient. And I think it's actually, in a way, relieving to get to that point. A year into practice, where you're not thinking about your classmates and you're not thinking about teachers. You're not thinking that much about the greater profession. You're thinking about your patient, and you should be thinking about your patient. Mm-hmm. So I think everyone kind of graduates with a chip on their shoulder, because they're in the profession in the grandest way they'll ever be, right? They're going from student to professional, surrounded by nothing but people going from student to professional. And then it all kind of fades, and you go, oh, no, I want to be good at my job because my job helps people, right? And it fades. And you realize real quickly that you're shit.
So, if you thought you were, head and shoulders above, you're like, yeah, no, not really.
You're like, oh, and if everyone else in my class was an idiot and I thought I wasn't, we're really fucked. Right?
And looking, just like the time, like foreshadowing, I look back, I've been in practice 10 years as of, kind of our practice will be 10 years old in February. But I always tell these guys coming in with like all of the stuff I hadn't taken by the time I got out of school, already done in school. And I'm like, when I got out, I'm like, I don't even know what I did, because all I knew was like ART, basic rehab principles and adjusting. But you still got
Yep.
people better, and then you're like, but I was absolute dog shit. You're like, I would like kick that guy in the teeth that used to treat people like that. And like, I can't imagine how mind numbing it was for the patient, but yeah. Talking about the goal at hand of like, well, it's the patient, that's the person in front of you. That's, the main objective. Obviously education is tantamount to becoming a good clinician, but are there any
Yep.
things you could, that you could really hold up, whether it's books, other courses, I don't know, any general advice on other skills? Obviously there's all those other components of being a good clinician, which don't get tackled in the typical class they're all going to take. Is there anything in particular like, hey, you need to explore this, whether it's ideas, books, classes, anything like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you could probably tell, I have a thing for books. and the other shelf is over there with all the unread ones. Okay, I'll say this. Communication is everything. It's everything. It gives you the ability to help people. And by that I mean, if you have the perfect treatment plan and on day one you don't communicate it well with the patient and they never come back, you have lost the opportunity to help someone, period. Doesn't matter how golden you are at everything else. If you cannot build trust, if you cannot communicate intent, if you cannot build all the soft skills around, you never get allowed to do your job, right? Mm-hmm. Because your job is not assess someone on day one. Your job is ongoing. Your job is to guide people as they go through a process and to help every aspect of the human, not just their injury. So if you don't have some mechanism built in for great communication, you're screwed. And I'm only saying that to say it doesn't matter specifically. I don't think everyone needs a framework. We have hosted motivational interviewing courses. We have hosted pain science courses. We have done a lot of this. They are almost always very poorly attended because a lot of people don't think of that as the entry point to be able to allow them to do their job well. Mm-hmm. They just look at it like, don't tell me how to talk to them. Tell me how to do the job. And I go, well, that is the job. That's literally you opening the door to the job. You might want to learn how to open the door and keep it open. Anyway, I could ramble about this for a long time because it's just so important. The fundamentals to me of really good communication really start with self-awareness. It starts with knowing who you are, your verbal tendencies, your communication tendencies, your postures, your all these different things. So I mean, I could recommend tons of different books. I've read a lot of them. But the reality is, I think having a structure in your life, whether that's a daily reading habit or a daily reflection habit or some kind of quarterly review, building anything in that is meant to specifically help you reflect on yourself and your communications and your relationships and your style of how you go about all these things is just number one. Mm-hmm. So when I first got into practice, we did 90-day reviews, and 90-day reviews covered absolutely everything from finances to numbers and goals to the culture in our business to how we were treating people to how we were talking to skill sets to all these things. And so we would take a long weekend once every 90 days and we would just rip apart everything about our business, but not from a business plan perspective, everything you can possibly imagine. Everything from how the patient gets greeted when they come in the door to the verbiage we were using, all these things. And it didn't take doing that for very long, maybe only 5 or 6 times before we narrowed in on, okay, this is us, this is who we are, this is our culture, this is what we want to instill with people. And it really settled in. But communication's so important that I think it needs to be on purpose all the time. Mm-hmm. It needs to be, not to say every interaction you have like a script. It's not that. It's every interaction needs to come with, you need to know your values around communication and how you want to communicate with people. Because if you can do that, honestly, the hard skills are kind of easy. You can take a seminar and learn them. You can do a lot of the other stuff. You can learn really easy how to do the job. Learning all this other stuff, it takes work. I have no idea why there was a thumbs up on my screen right there.
If you know ASL, it starts bumping in stuff. I don't know. Now you're going to get thumbs back. No, I love the communication on purpose, and I always tell this story because we talk about this quite a bit in like my art of assessment course. I have a good friend that has a much higher volume practice than I would ever be comfortable with running, but I still think he has good results because he has kind of a collection of services within his office besides just that 10-minute visit with the doc. but I shadowed him for almost 2 days right when I graduated. And he would leave the room and he'd be like, God, I just had to get that person moving. And I was like, what are you talking about? He goes, well, yeah, I just kind of like changed my pot. Like, so there's a lot of these subtleties of like, nonverbal communication that he was, like you said, fully aware of that he was doing, but it was not overt to the patient, of like, hey, we got to go here, or, changing like, hey, they got to go on the table. And I was just absolutely blown away, because there's no way that guy's going to see 60 people a day if he's not doing that. I mean, it's a training and stay on schedule. And that was my first like show into like, wow, I have a whole plethora of things to learn about in this realm. Yeah, for a variety of reasons, how you educate people if you're going to be an educator, which is happening in the treatment room as well. But then also your personal life, it plays, your skill stacking. It's not just in the clinic. So that just helps you outside as well.
Yeah. I think I've got one short thought and story on that one. So for one, I think a lot of people don't like to work on communication because it feels phony. If you've ever taken a course like motivational interviewing, it really does feel phony. And a lot of people like their communication to just be an automatic outreach of how they are feeling and how they are intellectualizing at the moment, which is great when you are well rested, you are well educated, you're in a great mental space, you have all the calories you need, right? If you're angry, tired, dehydrated, just in a shitty place in your life, or you actually have clinical anxiety or depression, this is going to sound horrible. You don't want it to be a direct outreach of what's going on inside of you. Yeah. You want it to be intentional, right? You don't want it to just be reflexive coming off of what you're thinking every single time. You want it to come like, my value is I want to make this patient feel cared for, and I'm in a fucking cranky mood today, right? Those aren't the same thing. Right. So there needs to be an obvious intention with that. This became very obvious to me. I was doing my preceptorship at the end of school. I was in Calgary with a sports doc there. Greg Uchaz was his name. He has been to so many Olympics. He is sought out as one of the best in Canada. And the very first patient I went in with, he opens their chart and looks at it, and then he closes it and he goes, wait, what was it again? Before he sees them. And then he closes it and he walks in the room and he tells a joke. And like, he had a list of jokes inside the front of this person's, and he literally checked off jokes of how, already told this guy one, right? And he's working with Olympians, he's working with world-class athletes all day. And he's literally got a checkbox of just like, oh, I already told him the weird dick joke, right? But it was insane how well it worked. And I remember kind of rolling my eyes, being like, oh my God, he's planning his jokes. They don't know he's planning the jokes. Yeah. They just think he's funny and he's relaxed and he's confident enough to be able to joke with them. And it instilled this immediate sense of he knows what he's doing, because he can make a dick joke while he's working on my ankle.
Yeah. So it seems nonchalant. Yeah.
It seems nonchalant, but so intentional. And I saw that guy, because I worked with him for 3 months, be in every kind of mood you can imagine. And he always had a joke. He always had something that did that to people. And it became so obvious it was intentional. And it became so obvious why he was in such high demand, regardless of his skills. Because there's a lot of people that have that skill set. Yeah. Right. He did not have a skill set that I go, oh my God, he's magic. But he was magic with communicating with the exact people in the way that he wanted.
When Seth could echo this, I spent my internship with Brett Winchester, and it was when he was still in his small office in Moscow Mills. And I remember this to a T, because I mean, Brett is one of those people that I think is just a master, in the manual, skill world. But I remember he literally turned, like, I joke with him now, and I'm like, I think he had an autistic moment, but he stood and looked at the wall for like a half second before he went into the next visit. I was like, what the fuck's he doing? And then so he came back in the room and I go, what were you doing? He goes, I take like a mental like break before I go into every room, so I'm not carrying like whatever was in the previous room or what I was thinking about. And I was like, oh wow. Like, I love that. But I never would have known it had I not asked him. He just looked like he's having a grand mal seizure looking at the wall. I was like, that's amazing. So there's that. And then talking about that rapport building is again a pillar that we talk about in here, because what I've seen with new clinicians in particular, and I mean, it could happen to anybody. It happens on days that maybe you're a little rushed. You blow right past rapport building, in particular with a new patient. You walk in, hey, I'm Dr. So-and-so. What's going on? Like literally taking that time to joke. How'd you get referred in here? Whatever it is, the little become a human, meet another human, not, a back pain patient, changes the world. And I mean, you can see it. I mean, I've seen people go in and just butt right into the case, and that's not good.
No.
So I like all that kind of like awareness, intention, take a pause. Like I think, and we, could list a variety of books and sources and all this stuff, how to build those skills better. But yeah, it's just simple fundamental.
I think everyone, once they know themselves, they know, like I know me, and if I have a patient, I know the way that I am most likely to make them feel welcome. Because there are certain things I would do that would feel phony to me still, even if I tried to learn the skill, right? Like even motivational interviewing as a structure, I've never felt comfortable using their set of questions and terminology, but I do know how I would make them feel a certain way. So it really starts with being self-aware and then understanding your intent. That's it. I don't think it has to come from a book or a course or anything of that sort. You just need to understand and put a value on it, because then you can start to experiment with it. And then all you have to do is build in some reflection of assessing whether or not that worked for you and your people, right? And so for me, one of the big ones I came up with is I don't want people feeling like they are cattle in my office. So for 10 years, I walked out to the waiting room myself, which something you just don't do as a doctor. I walked out to the waiting room myself in front of all the other people waiting and said, hey, I'm Dr. Ben. Nice to meet you. Shake their hand. Follow me. I'll walk you to your room. On the way to the room, I'm giving them a tour. It's not like a tour. It's direct to the room, but I go, hey, this is the movement studio. We might come out here later, depending on what we're talking about. There's massage rooms in the back over there. Hey, that's Shannon. Hey, nice to see you, Shannon. You met Jess at the front desk. If you got any questions, just let me know. We're going to be right in here. 20 seconds. And every single time people are going like, like instantly cared for, because you just guided them through this process, and you weren't doing the, like, I'm the doctor, you're the patient, stay away from me, I'm behind the curtain kind of thing. Does that work for every office? Absolutely not. Right. But the way that my office was physically laid out, it made it significantly better for everyone. And it made the culture of our office significantly more welcoming and relaxed. So that's what I did. Yeah.
Well, that's, I would say it's 50-50. Just our old office, that's what we did, just because that's how it worked. That was the flow. And I'm being honest, that wasn't on purpose. That's just like, we did it from day one. That's just what we did. And that was the easiest way to do it. Now it's a little bit different because the office is set up, but like we still, we're running up and grabbing people all the time. And we have no qualms. It's not like, oh my God, I'm going to sit, like you said, pop out from my office back here where I'm at and be like, okay, it's time to go. And, I buzz through 10 people and then I jump back in my office. So, if let's say it's 5 years down the road, and we could talk a lot about or different things with somatic senses, like who teaches for you, all those things. We can jump into that stuff if we want to paint the picture of what it looks like now. But where do you think that continuing education, whether that's your company, that is ecosystem as itself, needs to go to make the impact that you're looking to make an impact? Because you're having an impact on, it sounds like, almost 10,000 chiros. There's a lot more than that across the world. And, you can have your ripple effect, from wherever. But what do you need to do as a business? What do we need to do as a profession to kind of elevate the whole playing field?
Yeah, that is an enormous question, by the way. So many things. One thing I actually just kind of had the aha moment on literally this year, and I've had to remind myself of, is that it's constantly growing and it's constantly new. So what currently challenges me and is interesting to me and is new to me is not the same as what's new to Seth. And I'm only saying that to say, even stuff that has been around for a very long time, people and names that I am familiar with and practically bored of because I've heard them for 15 years, are still of extremely high value. And they are still of extremely high value to the people that are coming along. And over time, a lot of those things that are of high value, they stick around for a reason. And it's not usually because of amazing marketing. It's like the people that have been around for 15 years at this point, DNS being one of them, FMS, SFMA, a lot of these kind of big names, they're still around for a reason. They're still around because they are still useful. Are they, the everything, the be all end all? No, but they are still useful. And so a lot of what I constantly need to remind myself of is that this is not always all about progress. It's not always about taking Beau Beard and making him better. It's actually also about taking all the new generations and slowly changing the culture so that the profession that every new generation is walking into is 5% better than the generation before them. Every graduating class should be walking into a new profession. And so part of it is pushing boundaries. It's new. It's finding new bits of education, new ways of thinking, new processes, new methods, new principles, new tools, techniques, whatever it might be. But I really don't think that's most of it. I think most of it is these micro movements in the right direction. And a lot of that just comes with kind of who I put my stamp of approval on. And by that, I mean, if I bring someone in to teach and they are an excellent educator, but the way that they talk about pain science is extremely demeaning or degrading, or they think it's all bullshit, the tone and the culture of how they taught that weekend, regardless of the content, is actually probably setting us back. Because I think more practitioners need more education in pain science and that realm, right? And similarly, if I brought in a guy that's teaching on low back pain and he spends half of his weekend shitting on Stuart McGill, I kind of go, okay, you can have your opinions of him, but spending half of your weekend pretending that you have it all figured out and the guy that literally studied this for 50 years and wrote the books on it doesn't know anything is also not helping the culture of our profession. So I know this is a super vague answer because I don't think there's a specific answer to this. I think a culture shift over time towards everyone being more okay with not knowing everything and being open to a lot of the things they don't know is really what's important at this point. And I'll use myself as an example. When I first graduated from school, I kind of thought spine only guys were like, "Meh." I'm just like, old school, right? Like, who cares, right? Like, we're going to be so much more and so much bigger than this. But then you go and shadow a really good spine only practitioner that really does nothing but ART and adjusting. And 90% of their patients are walking out feeling better and smiling and happy with the service, and they look well on our profession. You can't help but go, oh shit, like I don't need to change a lot about that guy, because if he's educating the patient in a way that is not harmful to the patient, if he's using a lot of the tools and techniques that we have cognitively with the patient, even if he's not using the cool kind of rehab techniques that we'd use, he's doing a great job. So I don't know if I'd say there's one specific direction we need to go. I would love to see a lot of subluxation based guys just disappear. That would make me happy. I would love to see a lot of the evangelical types just disappear. That would make me happy, because I think that's not only do I not agree with them, I think it's actually problematic for healthcare and for chiros in general. I think actively doing damage is something I would like to see our profession not do anymore. But I think honestly, just the culture shifting a little bit more towards just kind of clinical excellence, involving more than having a tool for everything or a technique for everything, and being more all encompassing, that's really where I'd like to see it go. And so even when I bring in an educator to, I'll use Kathy Dooley as an example. She comes in and teaches a TMJ course for me. Just the way that she talks and the energy that she brings to the room is I go, I want all of you guys to have her energy by the time this weekend is over. I could not listen to a word she is saying as far as the actual content because I don't practice anymore. But I want every one of you to look at your patient like she does. And I want every one of you to treat people like she does. I want every one of you to be open to learning and being challenged the way that she does. And so it's really more fundamental than everyone needs this technique or everyone needs that process. Everyone needs this philosophy. It's a little more dialed back to stuff that just makes us all good learners and good clinicians. I think if we all got better at that, there's a million different soft tissue techniques. There's a million different loading techniques. There's a million different systems. I don't think anybody needs to know all of them. I think having the good fundamental soft skills and a high amount of ethical applications of them, we're golden, man. Like you can be a straight guy and it's perfectly fine. You can be a guy that does only ACLs and it's fine. You can be whatever. I don't need a professional identity to be perfect and unique and niched down. I just want us to be really freaking good at how we treat people.
And I think the further you go into practice, the more seminars that you go to, continuing education, you also realize how much overlap there is within methods and techniques, because what works does work, but that's also so based on basic science, like we said. But I think that's also good for you to realize. It's the kind of reverse aha moment of, the first one is, I have giant gaps in my knowledge. I have to fill those gaps. Then eventually you realize, like you said, nobody knows. Like, I call that like competent confusion. Like, you're like, oh, we're all just kind of fucking rolling with no information. There's very few physical laws in like biology and physiology. And then you realize that doesn't mean that's a get out of jail free card, but it's kind of freeing in sense of like, oh shit, like there's so much overlap. Like, now I can kind of play with stuff. And then you get to seek and destroy of like, well, man, this kind of makes sense to me, or it doesn't. So maybe you go take something that actually conflicts with your ideas or ideals. And then you're like, that's why I'm taking these courses, which I've seen some cool stuff with people that have attended, my courses of, they're 50, 60 years old. None of this was ever talked about when they were in school or in the first 10 years of practice. And they say they wish it would have. So the only reason they're practicing the way they were was there was a void, right? Which again is why you're doing what you're doing, is so that doesn't exist for everybody else. So I think that's just spot on of, again, I go back to the word ecosystem, is like changing the culture maybe so much, or rather than changing the ideas in people's heads first. So yeah, I really like that.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for going out and intentionally learning from people that you may not have considered learning from as well. And a lot of the people that I hugely respect are not the people who are like, I'm on DNS course number 47 because I want to be an instructor, or I went to the, FMS island this weekend to become the best in the world at FMS or whatever. Like, to me, I go, great, good for you. But are you light years ahead of people who just took FMS 1 and 2 and use it generally in practice? Right. Absolutely not. Right. Yep. What I have a huge amount of respect for is people that have gone through all of it. They've done all the big names, every last initial they could ever hope to have. And then they will go learn from someone who's a ring dinger of a chiro to go, it's probably got some good techniques. I'll learn from the guy. Mm-hmm. Right. Or the other way around. I have actually a specific chiro in mind, because since I started with Somatic Senses, which has been 8 or 10 years, he has come to endless seminars, absolutely endless seminars. And he's always in such a good mood, and he is so happy, and he always just gets in there and wrestles with the material. And then he goes back to his clinic and uses none of it. And I know that through various mechanisms. I know he does absolutely none of it. But I do know he's still doing our profession a service. I know he's learning. I know the culture of all the things that I'm bringing are leaning in. But I know he's just going back and he's seeing people for 8 to 10 minute visits, and he's doing a little bit of soft tissue, a little bit of education, and he's adjusting them, and he's doing great. He's doing well by our profession, and I'm actually okay with that. Not everyone needs to be Beau Beard or Brett Winchester or Michael Maxwell or Michael Shacklock. We don't need to be those people to actually all be just good at our jobs, right? You can come and take a bunch of courses and then go, that was great. Anyway, you're allowed to. About
an N of 1, you're like, I don't get it, but hey, no, and I mean, and again, but that guy is also. There's an internal mechanism or an internal dialogue that's occurring. If I'm not frozen here, hopefully my video is frozen.
Yeah, you're frozen to me, and I'm sure I'm frozen to you, but.
Awesome. Cool. I can still hear you, which is really cool. Well, it may just be a podcast version, but that's okay. We'll see if it kicks back up. What I was going to say is his internal dialogue has changed, which does make him a better clinician. Even if it looks like on the outside he's not using anything that he's been taught or anything, that like he's, whether he's a little bit more, he's safer, he's up to date, he hears something and refers out appropriately, but there's still something that's being learned there, even though it's you walk in and it looks 99.9% the same.
Yeah, and that's just it. What you have the ability to do, no matter what you're teaching, no matter what the content is, you have the ability to influence people's value set. You have the ability to influence what people see when they look at others. And, oh, hey, you're back. I see you now. And so even if he never uses any of the tools or the techniques, and he never changes his framework of how to actually treat a patient, he will actually look at them differently, and he will communicate with them differently. And I mean, the epitome of this is like, God, he came and took my kettlebell course, right? And I was teaching a kettlebells for clinicians course, which was just like a loading and patient education course in disguise. But he came and took it, just so happy, worked his butt off, was sweating, was sore, had a great time. He has no rehab area in his practice. He still doesn't even have TheraBands. Like, no loading whatsoever. But I know he learned some of the stuff I was teaching him. I don't know if he refers out for those. I don't know if he sees a huge value in it, but I'd be willing to bet just by learning some of the principles I taught him and seeing the value in loading and the value in some of the coaching that I showed, I get the feeling he's going to be better at his job. Right. And that's something that I don't look at our whole profession and go, we all need to do this. I kind of look at it and go, we all need to be better at whatever we're doing, and better looks like this.
Yeah. Well, for better or worse, it's something that you have to deal, that all of us have to deal with. But in your job now, is social media, in your opinion, a net positive or negative in terms of educating our profession? Like, and whether that's how you're using it, others are using it. I don't know what's kind of your take, and there's a couple different veins we could go, down with this, but what's the kind of 30,000 foot view on social media as far as our profession for education purposes?
I think it's siloed a little bit. So by that, I mean, there are Facebook groups like the Forward Thinking Chiropractic Alliance, where it's just like, it's almost this online social media safe space for chiros that all somewhat think similarly in a way. And I go, that's amazing. Like the fact that there's just an easy access gathering that anyone could find from their phone that could pose a question to people who think like them in our profession, cannot beat that. That's absolutely amazing. There's also the same thing can be said for new research. I mean, I don't know about you, but if you're not part of enough kind of like follow enough people on certain social media sites, like you're just constantly inundated with them posting new research about topics that are relevant to what we do, right? And I'm really good at going and finding whatever research I want as quick as I can get my hands on it. I could find anything quickly. But when someone posts something I probably wasn't aware of, I kind of go, oh, cool. I'm going to look at that, right? That doesn't happen outside of social media anymore. You used to have to read the textbooks or go to the library, right? So insanely positive in that way. On the other end of the spectrum, I have already been asked immense amount of times if I can do something that a guy saw on Instagram or TikTok. It's now more TikTok.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, right? Like it hurts that people even ask that question. But at the same time, part of me is like, well, you're here, you're at a chiro because you saw some guy use a Y-strap and tried to rip someone's head off, and it looked like it felt good to you, and now you're at me. I'm not going to do that to you, but here we are. Probably, the perception of what it means to be a professional has degraded extremely fast in the eyes of the general public because of social media. That part I hate, because what social media is, regardless of whether or not it's on a professional level, it's just a highlight reel of good, bad, ugly, or flashy, or whatever it is. And so a lot of the time what we're seeing is just the chiro that does a bunch of crazy stuff, mics up absolutely everyone, loves making a million cavitations, and then people go, oh, that's what a chiro is. And you go, well, that's what that chiro is. But those are the ones that are popular. The algorithms of social media feed other people more and more because it's so popular, and it actually has changed the face of how different professions are viewed. Maybe sometimes it's for the better, I don't know. But having the perception of any profession at the whim of an algorithm scares the shit out of me, because there's no fighting it. It's technology. It's zeros and ones, man. It's scary to think about that, right? That being said, there are also people who are, and this is both a good and a bad, immensely good at building a following and educating people because they've done it on social media. It used to be you had to write a textbook and teach at a university or have all this insane experience that people coveted, and then they would want to learn from you. Now you need to post consistently, full stop, right? And people want to learn from you, which is, it can be good, but it can be bad. It just is, it has taken most of the criteria that we use and made it just not as important anymore. And I can say that because I know people personally, because they literally live in my town or live nearby, that have an immense social media following, and they teach people how to treat patients. They teach people how to fix themselves, and they have never seen a patient. They never got their license.
Right.
And we're talking like 500,000 to 1 million followers online, and they never got a license. That's it. Right. And so I look at it and I go, this is just mind blowing to me that that has a bigger impact on my profession than someone who is clinically excellent and very good at their job, but doesn't bother showing it through social media. Right. So it's very sobering to me that that happens. So I don't have a mile high good or bad, net good or net bad. I think for our profession internally, net very, very good. It gives us the ability to be a big profession. I think in the view of the public eye, net very, very bad. I don't know where it evens out.
Yeah, and I heard Huberman saying something like weaponizing your social media for educational purposes, right? Like, which is harder and harder to do. I mean, I remember when that's like, I'd scroll through Instagram, that's all it was research articles from Cressy and different, all these people. And now, I mean, it's not the case, even though I follow the exact same people. So it is tougher, and you have to like hedge and trim and all these things. Yeah, I agree from that standpoint. I love it. Obviously, I've been paid dividends from like, getting my name out there, whatever. But at the same token, it is frustrating, but in the exact same light, I think when you see somebody get blown up, you can say, well, how did they get there? There may be a positive or negative of how they got there, and things that you don't want to do or things you don't agree with from an ethical standpoint, but also using that, which is no different than being a good educator if you got in front of a group of people, right? There's a reason they have an audience. There's a reason people are going to respond positively or negatively when you're in the classroom with them. So use some of those if you feel like you're not getting your due or your stage or getting your voice out there, if that's something you want to do as a professional. It just goes back to, it's a tool, and use it how you want, I guess.
Yeah, it very much is a tool. I wouldn't even say it's necessarily a problem. Well, yeah, it is a problem. It's you get more attention from doing things that are either flashy or attention grabbing or controversial than you do from finding things that are technically sound and high quality. Yeah. And that's just the reality, is if I have a six pack and I take my shirt off to teach you, if it's on social media, it is going to get significantly more traction. And that's just too bad. I would love to have a six pack, but I don't want it for social media, right? It's not the reason for it. But that's the reality of it. And so we actually, we hosted Zach Couples up here, who's a physio. And we hosted him, and I talked to him specifically about social media, because he has built, the vast majority of his following was social media built. And I talked to him specifically about the same kind of topic. And he essentially said, once I figured out I was an educator, it became like a necessary evil. And I learned to enjoy it. I learned to walk the line between saying things that were controversial and inflammatory or attention grabbing, and giving people things that were actually of value. But Zach's, regardless of his content, he's a considered and self-aware person, right? So he thinks about these things. A lot of humans don't think fundamentally about the outcome and ethics of what they're doing. They just get the positive rewards of likes, and they become Pavlov's dog. Yeah. Right. It's just literally keep going. And I don't mean to ever reduce any human to that, but I have seen that behavior where fast forward through 18 months of a lot of positive attention, and they're behaving in a way they wouldn't have behaved before, saying things they wouldn't have said before, because it garners more attention for them. And that's something that is, it can be dangerous. It can be great, but it can be dangerous as well. And it's one of the reasons I have always struggled with that. my temptation is constantly to just disappear from social media entirely. But then I also feel like, well, I'm neglecting my ability to impact people by just disappearing. I'm neglecting my ability to actually set the tone a little bit in certain scenarios if I'm not there, right? Because it's a room you get to be in, so to speak. You're just in a room with a bunch of people that aren't sitting right beside you.
Yeah. I remember I taught at a conference one time, and the bullet points on the first slide of a presenter were one of the first ones were 1 million views on multiple YouTube videos. That was one of the bullet points that was like a highlight. And I was like,
That was his resume.
fuck me. Like that's why we're here. And again, the information that was being presented that day was not mind blowing in any way. And I was like, Jesus, that's what our profession is like, propping people up with, even in a personal setting, right? That's what got them on the stage. So again, something that, you have to deal with. So like figure out how you're going to deal with it, whether that's you using it, you navigating it, patients navigating it. I mean, they're going to talk to you about that stuff. I mean, that's something you're going to have to address whether you like it or not. My kind of personal, I guess, funny story or struggle is like, I'll run into people that are like, dude, you got a pretty good following on YouTube. I go, I've been doing it for like 11 years. 20,000 subscribers over 11 years is not good. And they're like, oh yeah. And I'm like, yeah, I'm just consistent. I could care, like, I won't say I could care less, but I'm not doing it just for this massive following. Like I would just keep doing it for our patients. I mean, that's what we did it initially for the first 2 years. And it's just funny when people are like, oh, you're killing it. I'm like, not really, man, but thank you for the small kudos. Getting, if we took, you have over a decade of clinical experience. You've been an educator for, years on years, been around these high level educators. So there's a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience running around that melon of yours. So a question that we're going to ask everybody on this podcast, because one of our, I guess you could say it's a mission, it's an objective, as kind of, doctors, whatever, or scientists, whatever you want to say, is discerning something that's at the root of our profession that I think should have been sussed out a long time ago. And when you look into the data, there's nothing there. So then all we get to do is ask people that have, hopefully, they're certain about the profession. It's coming from a place of, validity, whatever it is, experience, evidence. So when you look at the body of evidence on joint restriction and trigger point in the chicken or egg scenario, and I can, we can explain as much as you want. I can leave it there and you could just dive in and have fun with it. But in your take from the past, however many years you've been in practice and teaching, what is your take on what the emphasis should be for a clinician in the attack of or triage or a hierarchy of treatment? I know this is way off based from clinical education, but this is going to be on every one of these podcasts because I think it's literally taught about in all of the courses we mentioned this entire podcast. Yet nobody knows why a joint will be restricted. It's never been proven why, right? There are mechanisms that are proposed. Trigger points are still debated, but then it's a huge focus of both maybe pain generation and also treatment. So where do you stand on what's driving what should be a focus, maybe what shouldn't be, or should we throw out both of those and just be focused on general human movement and pain science and, kind of set that aside? What's your take?
Yeah, that's another big question. Man. So for one thing, you've learned from Robert Lardner a few times, have you? So Robert Lardner has done an amazing job several times in front of me, changing some aspect about someone, whether it was their position, their breathing pattern, their focus, or whatever it was, and a set of trigger points disappearing. Same thing can be said for ranges of motion. Same thing can be said for joint restrictions, right? And a lot of the reason I'm bringing that up is because I think a huge amount of all of it is centrally driven. It is central nervous system driven. Chicken or egg? Who the hell knows? I don't even know if it is chicken or egg. I don't think, because chicken and egg implies one caused the other. I think they are part of this big soup of our body attempting to control things that it feels threatened by or cannot control, it cannot express motor control over, right? Whether a joint restriction is an adaptation to or a side effect of that, I don't know. Whether a trigger point is an adaptation or a side effect of that, I don't know. But I will say, I think the vast majority of it comes from our body's desire to express motor control, and then it grabs onto different amounts of muscle tension, different literally bones moving them in different ways, different joints doing different things. I know it's kind of a cop-out answer, but to me, almost everything dials back to it dials back to a global system.
Mm-hmm.
You very seldom find a single muscle with a single trigger point and nothing else wrong. I think you haven't looked if that's all you're finding. I think the same thing goes with a joint restriction, but I think maybe with a joint restriction, there can be a little more just physical cause to it in some way, meaning you slipped on the ice and caught yourself and you literally just managed to have muscles activate in a way that compressed something and doesn't feel good. Like really funny example. 5 years ago, maybe more than that, Michael Maxwell and I were at a course in Calgary, and it was at Mount Royal University, and we were playing ping pong in between at lunch one day, because we were at a university and we were just like, hey, let's go grab the ping pong paddles. And at one point, I just absolutely annihilated the ball. It came down and then straight back up like into his face, and it missed him, but he went like that and just like flinched and instantly went, oh, fuck, and just instantly couldn't turn his head. And to anyone who would palpate the guy, to anyone that would touch him, it just felt like he had this huge amount of protection and joint restriction, right? Sure enough, an adjustment made it go away by like 80%. I'm only saying that to say, I think it was just an adaptation to a shitty ping pong serve. It was the issue in that scenario. I don't even know if it's necessary for me to always know where everything comes from. I just need to know my audit process that I go forward through once I've done an appropriate assessment. That's it. And if I find one thing in isolation on almost anyone, I kind of think I just did a shitty job. Whether it's took a shitty history, did a shitty assessment, or I just didn't, I don't trust my palpation skills or whatever it is. I don't know. I think generally speaking, you find people that move really, really well that have a lot of these little adaptations all over the place anyway. And I don't even know if I always care about them. I'm just rambling at this point, but no, I don't think I have a good answer for you.
And there's no right answer. We've been playing around with consensus AI and all these things. There's no answer. That's the funny. So I have this question in one of the courses I teach, because we're talking about joint palpation and, just your audit system of objective findings. And if one of our audits is, joint restriction, like, okay, is something, do you have segmental restriction? Did you apply or restore motion? What caused it in the first place? Because then that leads you to, well, why were you treating it? And even though we may not, I don't know if I'd say I don't care about the cause, because I'm a nerd and I do care. And that would be like the unraveling of, some continuum that I do want to explore. But I would say maybe it's impossible to know, but you're always asking yourself the question to make yourself better, right? Which gets into that internal dialogue. What's going on, always asking why. But it's just,
I 100% agree.
But
there's so many causes.
It's maddening.
It is, but that's also why, as a clinician, you need to be very broad in your understanding of a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Even just understanding of how the immune system works. Like we've all had that patient where it's like things were getting better. And then they come back and they feel like the world has ended. All of a sudden, everything's bad again. And you just find out they went on a bender Saturday night, right? And you go, oh, okay, I get it, right? But if you didn't ask the question, if you didn't actually put on your thinking cap and go, oh, this is a global inflammatory problem that I just didn't think to ask about, you never learn, you never move on from that. You don't have the ability to install that lens and look at other patients through that if you didn't find out through one. The same could be said about, that's one of the reasons that assessment and history are just so tightly wound, right? Because I think there's also a lot of the time where people have a chronic issue that is actually their body's best attempt at adapting to some stress that they're putting on it, right? There are some traumatic issues, there are some other kind of issues, but a lot of the time, a lot of problems that I would see in the clinic, I would call a healthy adaptation to an unhealthy habit, or an unhealthy, or not even necessarily unhealthy. This is a completely normal adaptation considering what you're doing. right? And so it's just a matter of figuring out what they're doing, because they're not in the office 24 hours a day. And so if it's a trigger point that keeps coming back in the exact same place, you have a world of stuff that you can think about to answer the question why, and you're probably never going to come to the exact one answer, because it's probably a bunch of different answers. But your job as a clinician is to figure out of the 100 things that could cause this, which are the one or two most likely. Let's start by intervening on those, and then audit from there, or whatever it might be.
Yeah,
So it could be a drinking problem.
It could be, and it more than likely, depending on where you live, is. Besides cancer, everything is a positive adaptation. I mean, your body does not do things on accident, and the few things that are, blips in the system and get replicated. I mean, there's also kind of a reason for that, right? But asking yourself, I mean, that goes back to, again, you broke it down to, okay, with the conundrum between, trigger point joint restriction comes down to communication. Well, why might that thing be caused systemically or other, factors? So it goes back to another core skill, maybe outside of what we would think is, core clinical practice, but then also bare bones of first principles of science of going, once again, spinning it down. And I think that's what we're always trying to do, whether that's with clinicians we work with, our patients, is go back to like fundamentals. You're supposed to make things like, it comes back to the same things, which can seem boring. It can seem rudimentary, repetitive, but it's like, that's why that stuff works. That's why high level athletes, you end up going back to that, right? People are doing this fancy, crazy, wacky stuff. And it's like, can you do this? It's your big toe move. I don't know. Maybe not. Let's do that thing. Let's do that first. All right, 2 more questions for you that I used to ask everybody. So I've been doing iterations of podcasts since I've been in practice for 10 years now, and I've always asked these 2 questions. So you can extrapolate, or you could be very quick with them. What is one thing in the clinical practice realm? Let's not go into general life. What is one thing that you held to be true for a very long time that, as of late, within maybe the past year, 6 months, you're like, Jesus, was I proven wrong on this thing? Or, new information came to light. Is there anything that stands out?
Yeah, that everyone should feel good all the time. Frankly, it's
okay. How'd you get there, or why did that become?
Well, a lot of it started as an ego check of realizing that certain people just weren't going to feel better. But the reality is, I know we are built with protective mechanisms in both cognitively, neurophysiologically, and physically. We are built with protective mechanisms all the time. The only way the only way most people are going to feel absolutely fantastic and move magnificently and be happy all the time is to try and do nothing, right? It's to be in a float tank for your life. And I think I held people to every single person that came in. I wanted them to get to the point of being 100% pain-free and feeling amazing all the time, only to realize pretty early on, that's actually not even, for one thing, it's extremely not realistic, but it's also like, who cares? There are people who need to feel that way because it's so distressing to them to have any kind of pain or discomfort. And then there's people like me who I go, I can have a little pain. It's not the end of the world, right? Like I really don't think everyone needs to be pain-free all the time. I just don't think that is even a goal we need to be aiming for unless it is the patient's goal.
I like it. So then the flip side, what is something that you think is true, or it is the case, but there's not evidence, it has not been substantiated by anything, from an evidence-based standpoint?
Well, that's going to be hard because I have not challenged all of my assumptions on PubMed. So if I were going to go spend a lot of time on Google Scholar and PubMed and whatever else might be, I'd be able to challenge almost any assumption. I think that the basis of how people feel is physically comes down to their relationship with self. And by that, I mean how they view their place in the world, how they view their body, how they view their relationships, how they view a lot of these things. People's sense of self has a bigger impact on their pain and on their movement and on their happiness than almost anything else. And that's something that it's very vague and it's very loose to say that. but happy people hurt less. And that's something that I feel like is very likely supported by the evidence. I don't know that for sure, but I feel like it's likely that it is. But I think that in a strange way, learning how to make people happy and learning how to help people move towards happiness, despite all of the shit that they come to you for, is equally as valid as helping them solve the problems that they came to you for. Sometimes that's going to be a conscious process that they know you're trying to just make them smile. And other times it's a matter of depending on what they need to make them happy. So, I take this as an example. I had a transgender person come in at one point who had all of the horrible experiences that a transgender person goes through. The violence, the getting kicked out of their house, the feeling like they didn't have anyone to go to, all these different things. They came in with their significant other, also transgendered. The best thing I did for that person was make them feel safe. They had all sorts of very real physical issues. Like they were a wreck physically, but I made them feel like, and they were my last patient of the day. I made them feel like I could be here all night. Like, let's hang out. Let's go for it, right? And they were like, I'm going to tear up just thinking about it. But they were crying half an hour in because they felt safe. They had this big emotional just release. And I remember thinking like, this is the most important thing I could have done for this person today, is to actually make them feel safe in my presence. And that is something that year over year, it becomes so much more obvious to me as a guy that has taken all the tools and has taken all the seminars. It has become so much more obvious to me that making people happy, making them safe, and making them feel okay with themselves in the world is more important than anything else we could do. That could be just in how you frame their back pain. It could be in how you frame their complete identity in the world. It depends on the person. But I think that is fundamentally possibly the most important thing you can do as a clinician.
Want to wrap that back into what we were talking before. Seth and I just dove back into the Shacklock review on trigger points from 2015. And at the end, in the conclusion, I mean, literally, I don't know how many pages that thing, 40 pages.
37.
Oof.
So at the end,
Seth's got the numbers, my friend. He even knows his birthday, come to find out.
what was something like 75% of trigger points were absolutely correlated with limbic system involvement. So it's like this inextricable, like
it's not surprising at all.
Yeah, it's not surprising. But you go through all these mechanisms of what causes trigger points, how to treat them, all these things, and they get to the end, they're like, yeah, but let's
just make them happy.
Yeah. And you're like, well, son of a bitch, man. You didn't talk about anything of the limbic system and how to treat that.
Tell them a fucking dick joke, okay? Treat that trigger point with a dick joke.
Well, in my personal story that always kind of gets me, I don't know, a little teary-eyed, or to realize the importance of kind of what you were saying, but in a little bit different vein. And this is kind of funny too, that this patient came right after I actually took layman's course. I can't remember the year I took his course, like 15 or something. I came back, in the clinic that next week. I had a new patient. This guy came in, 15 years, chronic low back pain, fusion. He's in a massive flare up. He doesn't look good when he comes in, just like health, all this doesn't look good. And it's one of those, I'm air quoting here if you're not watching the video, chronic pain patients that you take them through like a top tier SFMA. Nothing really increases pain, even though he's saying he's in like dire pain, which is an immediate like, oh,
that's a flag.
And I'm like smiling of the course I took that past week, and I'm like, oh, what's this? And we go through the whole thing. Well, we get to the end, and I talk to him. We talk about all sorts of stuff. Like you said, it's kind of, I wouldn't say safety was the thing, but being heard, understanding that like this isn't the end of your world, and that I don't really think it's your back, like an injury maybe, and you don't just say that to this person, but how you explain it matters. I had him do like cat cows and stuff for like homework because he couldn't move his back. He had no feedback, surgical, site. So years go by, and I've treated this guy now for years, and I get a Facebook message one day when I think I put something online about basically getting my teeth kicked in the clinic, or, I'm a piece of shit or something, somebody, whatever, just something funny. And he sends me a message. He goes, hey, I don't think you ever knew this, but I was like days away from committing suicide before I came into your office. And I'm like, I would have had no clue. I did like what I thought was very menial, basic back rehab, chronic pain management, and who knows what had happened. And I just like, that's always in the back of my mind of, I treated him like I would have anyone else, which luckily I don't allow my bad days to be my bad days in the clinic, and you treat everybody like you care and they're the best thing and you're at the center of it. So I know this was, on continuing education and learning, techniques and skills and how to bolster your tool belt, but it really comes down to maybe more of the soft skills, making sure that while you're learning all those other things, you're not losing your humanity as you try to like create some identity as a clinician that doesn't like jive with what your actual end goal is. So, and that's not always easy to do, if I'm being honest. So
no, I think it's one of the hardest things to do, because it feels like you have to fundamentally change something about how you exist in the world, because how you connect with other people and how you make other people feel is really who you are in the world. Right. And so it's to work on those soft skills. I think some people see as almost unimportant, but I think a lot of people actually feel threatened by the idea of changing how they say, what they say, when they say it, and the full culture around that. It's not easy, right? That's, if anything, the most difficult set of skills you could possibly hope to learn on your way to mastery is all these other things that we've talked about. How to not make your bad days a bad day in the clinic, right? That's not easy, man. That takes a huge amount of self-awareness and intent to be able to do that. The energy required to take your own person and set it aside and be the person you intend to be for your patients every single day, especially if you're going through a period in your life where you don't feel amazing outside of the clinic, that amount of energy, just infinitely more than the energy it takes to go to an ART seminar. Infinitely more.
Yeah.
And that's something I have a huge amount of respect for. And it's one of the reasons I don't look at people and go, oh, have you done a million different seminars? Can you show up for your patients? Right. And I think there are amazing, to bring it all back to education, there are amazing educators out there who do a phenomenal job of knowing all there is to know on their topic, teaching you the amazing parts of your topic. I keep saying TMJ because Kathy's coming to mind and she's teaching TMJ courses for us. And same thing with you with assessment and with rethinking running rehab. You can take all of that, but if you don't put it in the context of a clinician that is willing to put forth the effort and care about the human in front of them, it really doesn't matter. And I remember, I think maybe I'm going to say 2016 or something like that. We hosted a course in Victoria, British Columbia. I was there. It's Michael Maxwell's hometown. He was there. And I think it was Tony Gentlecore, who's a strength and conditioning guy. We had him teach a course there. And he was just the most loving, amazing person, was giving us all these hugs. He was super thankful to have been there. It was absolutely amazing experience. And Mike and we got together and had dinner afterwards. And I remember kind of going, can we just, from now on, just install a no assholes policy in this business? And like, I'm willing to take a risk on someone to find out if they are an asshole, but if they are, they get one seminar and that's it. I'm never hosting them again. Right. I was like, life is too short to have that energy be what I spread. And it's way too short to have that be what I bring into my life. And so I'm very proud to feel like most of the people that I bring in don't bring asshole energy. They don't bring pride and ego energy. They bring in the energy of like, no, I just really, really want to help people and I want to help other people do the same. Right. Unfortunately, the list gets shorter when that's your criteria for who you bring in as an educator. But I love getting the feedback from people afterwards, not just that like, this was an amazing course, but this was an amazing instructor. I've never felt more seen and present and taught by someone before. Right. And that's something that is just, it's world class. It's absolutely amazing. That's what we aim for a lot of the time, because that translates to the clinic just as much as the skill.
Well, and I'll just back up what you said because we'll go into the commercial part of this podcast, but like Dr. Dooley was my neuroanatomy professor, which I was absolutely blessed because she was only there while I was in school, like for those classes, and then exited because she went to, teach at some other medical schools, moved to New York.
So she teaches at like 6 universities now.
I don't know. It was like, she was in the Virgin Islands and New York all at the same time. I don't know what she was doing, but,
that sounds right.
But like her passion and like the way that when you had a question, she's like, oh my God, like any question somebody asked, it seemed like the smartest thing you'd ever asked. And you're like, I guess I'm pretty smart.
But that's like, so amazing to be in a room with a person like that.
So if you are listening to this, you're thinking about going to the course, as you said, it's going to be great information. I mean, she's absolutely brilliant. But the way she teaches, the way she interacts is amazing too, which if you can learn how to do that with your patients while you're learning from her, I mean, that's a twofer. The commercial part for us is, I'm teaching Rethinking Running Rehab in Portland, March 2nd and 3rd, first weekend of March, right?
That's right.
And that is at Mount Hood Chiropractic, which
Mount Hood.
I might be staying a few days and skiing if I get a card for that. We'll see. Yeah, you can head over to Somatic Senses, sign up for that course. If you haven't seen that one, the quick and dirty on it is, it's my take on using all of the things that we have learned, right? Integrating the things that we've learned, in particular, the assessment piece from gait and how you can use gait as an audit and where that comes into your practice. And then we talk about all the fun stuff like how aerobic capacity plays into, pain mechanisms and things like that. So we nerd out for the whole weekend, and I know you'll learn a ton. And the coolest thing with that course is, I mean, we watch people run, we look at all this stuff and we actually apply it. I mean, we break down real cases, so it's fun. So I'm looking forward to that. It's been probably a year since I taught that course.
Crazy. It's, gait is one of those things that, actually sent this out in a newsletter a few months ago. I don't think I respected gait to the level I should have for the first many years of practice. One of the primary reasons being I always had other people that I would refer out to when it came to people that gait was their sport in some way, meaning primarily runners. And so I didn't respect it for what it was. And you just hit on it a second ago, in that it's an insight into so many other things. It is not just like, if you're going to be a runner, you need to make sure you run well, right? Mm-hmm. Or to cause less injuries. It's watching someone run. What you're watching is one of the most natural human movements that gives you insight into the global machine that is the human. And that's just so valuable. And I've learned a lot of that from a variety of people over the years, but this is actually one of those things I wish I could go back to maybe 2 years into practice and go like, I'm going to double down on gait. Mm-hmm. Because if I double down on gait now, it will just open up this world of so many other things, and they would all make a little more sense through watching the human machine do the activity it was basically designed to do, right? And that's something, it sounds like it's a sales pitch at this point. Maybe it is. But the point being, I'm not a running guy. I'm not a guy that works with runners. As I talked about earlier, I'm a weightlifting guy more than anything, which I know you can't tell looking at me, but that was my upbringing. That was my background. And so I always was kind of like, runners, you can go talk to the runner guy, right? Now I look back at gait and I go, I would watch my weightlifters run. Mm-hmm. I would watch them walk. I would watch them run. I would put them through a gait assessment if I knew then what I knew now. Yeah. And that's something that, I can't emphasize enough, that gait and running assessment and courses are not just for those people looking to work with runners.
And the one, little peek behind the curtain of that course, and any course that I teach when we talk about gait, which is kind of inextricable from anything I teach because it's a big, premise. We always say that gait is kind of that highest level of neuromotor integration. So if you did something, right, in a treatment standpoint, whether that's on the table, movement integration, whatever you want to call the thing you did, if it's going to stick, in my opinion, you will see some manifestation in gait if there was some aberration before. And I think that's a really cool thing because it's very hard to pin down, well, I made a change, right? You could look at a top tier movement. You could watch them, swing a kettlebell again. But then you see something, if we talk about like the Chinese government and the money they've invested in technology that literally uses gait like a fingerprint, which is actually more individual than a fingerprint for identifying someone and then saying, if I can see a change in that. Now, we're not saying if it's good or bad change, right? Mm-hmm. That I've made an actual like a subcortical change. Like that's where I just get like spun up. And that's all the kind of stuff we talk about of like how to use that and weaponize it in your practice. So yeah, we'll be doing that all weekend.
Yeah. Such an American thing to do, to call it weaponizing with everything, by the way.
I know. I started using that, and I used to use the word titration a lot. And Rich Olman days, like why do you use that so much? I was like, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know.
It makes me sound smart. Just screw off, man.
I like it. Yeah.
Rich is one to talk. That guy uses more words in the run of a day than any of us will. So
yes, he does. And when he called me on it, I was like, do I use it that much? And I was like, I probably do if he's calling me on it. But yeah, you will hear it.
You pay attention.
Create a bingo sheet that weekend, March 2nd, 3rd, for all of my little nuances, and we'll give away some prizes.
So we got titration and weaponize. Seth, you could tell me what are other words he uses a lot.
They have a bingo sheet.
I got a list of like 18 things I think that me and Alex
get ready. Yeah, it's coming.
Well, you're gonna have to, Seth. You're gonna have to send him to me for that Portland weekend.
We'll definitely
I'll hand him out at the start of the weekend.
But I will put links to my specific course along with just Somatic Senses website. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about in terms of the business, or any last words of wisdom before we jump off here?
No, not really. Just give a shit. That's it. I mean, that's
don't be an asshole. Give a shit.
Don't be an asshole. Actually, give a shit. Like, give a shit about your career, about yourself, about other people. It's become strangely, especially for men, it's become almost strangely cool to seem like you have your shit together all the time. It's become very much, everyone feels like they have to look a certain way and appear a certain way. And like caring too much has become something people are afraid of now, which is really weird. And that's something that it's become harder if you're the kind of person that cares a lot in the last few years, seeing a lot of the shit that happens in the world and seeing a lot of the kind of injustice and stuff that goes on, whether it's in your profession, in your clinic, or in the global world. And so really the words of wisdom to depart with are just keep giving a shit. There are a lot of people who give a shit that hide it. Show us that you care. Keep caring. It's difficult, but it's worth being the person that cares in all of these scenarios.
And Ben will have a Care Bear Somatic Senses shirt for sale on the website within, I don't know, probably 30 days with the business acumen he has. So look forward to that. And that's
it's just going to be a Care Bear, and it's just going to say "give a shit" below it. That's all.
I don't know which Care Bear that is, but
the brown one.